One.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Behind the Pun Walls.
Great to see everybody here. See chat's going mad already.
Yeah. Tonight we are here to talk about yesterday's announcement from Whaikaha, and we'll have some guests coming to do a panel very shortly. Anything to add before we get there, Paul?
I'm actually really looking forward to the panel that we've got, because we've got two absolutely brilliant people who are experts in the field of disability advocacy. We've got Nick Ruane and we've got Dr Rebekah Graham, who are just brilliant people. I don't think we should keep people waiting, but I will say before we start, the interview that we've got with Carmel and Shanan that's coming up at the end, we should probably give people a warning that was pre-recorded before this week and everything that happened this week. But we'll go over what happened this week in the news after we have a chat to Nick and Rebekah. So let's get things started, I guess. Press all the right buttons. First time I'm going to screw this up at some point, I'm sure. Right, welcome to the show. I didn't screw that up. I'm impressed. I'm so impressed. How is everyone tonight?
Yeah, really great. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you both. Nice to see you, Rebekah.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. I'm joining you from Dunedin this time round. I normally live in Hamilton, but I'm down south visiting various other kaupapa. So they very kindly made sure I'm like, I need a room. I've got a very important interview. Please make sure I get here.
How cold is it down there?
Oh, I think it might snow on Sunday, and the temperature just dropped this afternoon. It was quite nice this morning, and then you could just feel it mid-afternoon, boom, freezing.
Don't envy you.
Hey, look, I just want to start my argument with both of you. You first, Rebekah. What was your initial reaction on the announcement yesterday morning?
Oh, it was, you know how you think sometimes, because we're in August, and it's felt like a bit of a war on disabled people and families.
Yeah.
And then it lulled, and you think, oh, you hear this rumours of an announcement, and you think, surely it can't get any worse. And then it all just drops, bombshell after bombshell after bombshell, and you're thinking, oh, good grief. Oh, good Lord. This is rough.
Yeah. And for you, Nick?
Yeah, thank you, Blake. And I appreciate your thoughts on this, Rebekah. I kind of had a couple of days warning on this one. I sort of heard all of the rumors going around and had some time to gather myself. But I'd been involved in the DPO movement since the early 2000s and been amongst those that had really agitated and shouted and jumped up and down to have a disabled person's ministry, a Whaikaha. We had it in our minds and we knew exactly what we wanted. So when the announcement dropped, it was pretty dark actually on Thursday. It was a really sort of, I sort of knew what was coming, but still to have it drop was really quite devastating actually, because so many people had worked for so long to get that announcement out, to get that ministry stood up, and to have that all be pretty much gutted in one day. In a 30-minute press conference was really hard. You know, it really kind of felt like a kick in the guts and just a real step backwards for how the many thousands of people will receive support and how we do disability in our country. And so it's kind of taking a little while to settle in, but it was a tough day for sure.
And when they made the announcement yesterday, I'm kind of curious as to how fast you got feedback from people and what that feedback was.
I think for our community, we're still kind of in a state of shock, trying to figure out well, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like, they say that there's no immediate change. Cool. But what does this mean for us long term? And there's been no answers to that. And I think that really is where a lot of people are, certainly from our community as parents, are right now trying to figure out what will this mean? What will the impacts be? And the answers to that have been very non-existent.
Yeah. I think I just want to bring back a couple of days to the announcements around the beneficiary, the cuts to our benefits. They were messaged really quite awfully, and there was so much. What does this mean for me? How is this going to impact me? And just fast forward a couple of days to Thursday, there was so much of the minister messaging there's going to be no immediate impact to service. So I think there was an acknowledgement that people were going to be feeling really confused.
And the
I think
audio.
the microphone's playing up a little bit
So
there, Nick.
yeah, it's a very confusing time, that's for sure.
Yeah. Actually, Rebekah, you're doing a lot of work around that poverty field as well. What's your interpretation of how MSD is going to incorporate these changes and the impact that that's going to have on the disabled community?
Oh boy, do I talk about that? I'm just going to be really blunt here. Look, thank you. Look, we are under a government that is rapidly implementing austerity. We are under a government that is being incredibly cruel and bringing back the cruelest part of sanctions and benefits. And they are using languaging that is incredibly soft around it. So they're softening it. They're making it sound very reasonable. They're making it sound very sensible. But, you know, particularly disabled people are incredibly good at looking past that spin at what it really means. And what it means is that disabled people are on job seekers, so they are going to be subject to incredibly cruel sanctions. Even disabled people who are on supported living are not going to be exempt from this and are going to be subject to it. There is no accountability for wins or work and income in terms of making sure that this kind of information is presented in accessible formats, to making sure that information gets to people on time. There is zero accountability for work and income to make sure that people are aware of their obligations. It's vague. Nobody knows what these activities are. Nobody knows what is going to be expected of them. Nobody knows what these so-called obligations are. And now this very ministry that has been so awful to disabled people in the past. And again, I want to make the point, disabled people and their families have long memories. We know how MSD treated us in the past. We know their cruelty. We know their harshness. And now suddenly we're expected to believe that this ministry that implemented cruelty against disabled people has radically changed and radically transformed and will now magically support disabled people. I don't think so. And that disingenuity is, I think, for me anyway, the core of the anger of how dare you expect us to swallow your spin and agree with you and take you on trust when we know how awful this very ministry has been to us in the past, and now suddenly we're expected to engage in a high trust model and share our personal details and talk about our needs. Like, it's cruel, it's appalling, and it's incredibly disingenuous.
So what are your hopes that if we are able to do some advocating that we can encourage this government to do from the opposition side?
Nick, do you have any ideas before I go off on another rant?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest flaws around what's happened so far has been that disabled people haven't been involved in any of the consultation around any of the decisions that have been taking place here. And I think that's been one of the real problems with this decision. And so from my perspective, there's been a long promised phase 2 of this process. And if you look at some of the documentation, it talks about phase 2 is at the moment paused, but will hopefully be implemented. And I think that's really where we need to lean in as a wider disability community, as disabled people, as our allies, as our wider network of families, whānau, and allies, to really demand that we have our voice heard. That was one of the biggest real points of pushback. DPA mentioned it in their press release that came out on Thursday, that there was no disability voice in the review. And I think so that for me, that's where we really need to have our voice heard very strongly, that in any future or in any next stage of the review, because there has to be one, because EGL has been put on pause. Goodness knows what that means. And I think we need to be really aware of what that means, that disabled people are at the table around that consultation to have our voice heard, because at the moment, up until now, we haven't had our voice heard. And the nothing about us without us, I come from the DPO movement, that nothing about us without us was fundamental to everything that we did. And this government has just totally abandoned that. They've just walked away from that commitment to engage with disabled people around this consultation, this review. They've just walked away from that and done what they want to do. And for me, that's why the other day, it was on Friday, I just felt a huge moment of solidarity with Māori when they did what they did to Te Arawhiti. I just said, wow, like, here we are, they're just doing what they need to do in order to save money. So for me, I was like, here we are, so we're going to have to just really stand up and be very strong in our advocacy to demand to be at the table through our representative organizations and through our points of advocacy. Otherwise, they're just going to keep doing what they have to do, or what they feel like they want to do.
And
Rebekah, you can do your rant now if you want.
Always up for it. Like you were saying something.
I'm going to ask another question. What do you think people have to do? And you can do a double rant.
I think people, like, this is a political occurrence. Like, it's very clearly politically driven. If you read the full review, it's very clearly driven by a need to reduce the cost of disability services. And I think what we need to do is we need to acknowledge that A, this is politically driven, but B, respond politically. So write to your MP, outline to your MP exactly what this means, the fear, the worry, the concern, the reduction in supports. I know that's an extra burden on everybody. That's the last thing we feel like doing. But writing to our MP, writing to our ministers is very clearly says, this is not acceptable. We're not happy. I'm going to circle back to, sorry, that's a terrible phrase, circle back. Who uses that? Me, apparently. To something Nick said. And I'm going to go back to, if you read the full report, there's some very unpleasant hooks that are buried in the report. And one of the hooks, if you look at the concluding comments, it says, I'm going to quote it directly, the reviewers are uncomfortable about the continued operation of the NASC-based system of needs assessment alongside 3 long-standing EGL trials. This needs to be addressed. The continuing coexistence of these very two different forms of DSS is confusing and muddled and results in inequities in the services and supports being provided to clients. The EGL principles are worth giving effect to, but a revised approach needs to be developed. And what that tells me, because that has not been included in the recommendations, nobody is admitting to this in any of the press I've seen. What that tells me is that this government and this minister want to completely decimate EGL in terms of an approach, in terms of a funding, in terms of a disability support, and they want to take us all back 20 years to that very patriarchal, patronising NASC-based system of you have this and you have this and you have this and you can spend your money here and here and here and that's it. And that gives me the shits, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Rebekah was saying. I took that for that same comment from the report, and the other phrase that really gave me the shivers was the primacy of natural supports. And when you read that in the report, that really gave me the fear of God, to be honest, because we went to court many times to argue over what that means. For the government was trying to say that families of disabled people with severe disabilities should be providing natural supports and shouldn't be funded for the funded family care, and they lost many times over. And now the government is coming back and saying that natural supports should be in primacy over funded supports such as flexible supports and also EGL. So we've got some massive arguments coming up here about EGL and about flexible funding and about individualized funding. So there's some things in here that really could turn your hair grey if that's a problem for you. So I read this report and it really makes me very concerned.
One of the things I noticed yesterday during the press conference is that it kind of felt, listening to what they were saying, and Louise Upson is very well versed at giving bad news with a smile. She seems to enjoy it, but it felt very much like this is an idea and a ministry that was set up not that long ago and not given enough a chance to succeed. And I'm a fully able-bodied person, so I know I come at this with a really different perspective to people who are in the community. But am I misreading that?
I think that Louise is a very competent minister, and she has skated over very well that disability support services have not been funded properly for the last decade, possibly the last 2 decades. So when disability support was in health has a large enough budget that it would just simply rearrange a few things and it would make it work. And she has very carefully and elegantly, I'll give her credit, skated over that there is increasing need for disability support services because we have an aging population. We have increased number of survivors from what used to be fatal events. I'm talking stroke, things like that, which you would once die from. You now have people who survive, which is fantastic. But there's a need for ongoing disability support. We have babies being born prematurely who now survive, and that also comes with additional support. And we have an increase in population. So, of course, when you have an increase in population, part of that is an increase in disabled people. So all of that has been happening apace for at least the last 10, probably the last 20 years. But disability support funding has not kept pace with our population. And we as a country, or the government, has quite conveniently skipped past that reality into, oh no, we're just being fiscally responsible. Oh no, Whaikaha, let's blame Whaikaha because they were set up too quickly and they didn't really have the tools and they're a little bit incompetent. Instead of going, actually, as a country, we've never grappled with the fact that we have consistently underfunded disabled people and their families. We have expected families to cover this gap. We have expected carers to give freely of their time and their energy to meet the need, and we have not supported people in the way they need to be, and we have not provided supports in the way they need to be because, I don't know, we want to give money to landlords, we want to give money to tobacco companies, we want to give money to tax cuts.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, I read the subtext of the announcement on Thursday as really a political hit job, and that was to, if you go back and you look at what happened with the DSS, there were ups and downs throughout the last 10 years, but it went back further than that. It probably goes back the last 30 years, to be honest. And every year, the ups and the downs would be funded, and no one would make a big fuss out of it. They'd just up to meet the need because there was need there. No one would argue that there wasn't need there. And that's just what happened because it was within the overall Ministry of Health budget. Now that it's been surfaced and placed, now that it was surfaced and placed into Whaikaha, it gets put into the spotlight, and that's when it becomes an issue, and that's when it becomes something that you can spotlight and therefore make into an opportunity to make political hay out of, which is what we saw on Thursday. So I just feel really sorry for the staff at Whaikaha and the leadership team at Whaikaha, who I know worked incredibly hard. Everyone saw that. It's not up for debate. Who were really not well served by the reports and all of the things that were said. It's just not in question that disability supports are underfunded. That they are, and they need to be more comprehensively funded. We need to have a proper conversation as a country about how we fund disabled people, families, and whānau. And we haven't had that conversation ever about how we do it properly, how we direct that funding, what mechanism we do it by. That's why EGL is so important, because it creates a mechanism and a set of principles to start driving the funding. But the funny thing about that is that National started that policy and that framework, and now they're undoing it. So as a disabled person, I don't really understand why they're coming back and redoing and effectively killing a policy that they supported in the first place. So it makes no sense to me, other than a short-term political win for a government that's looking for wins at the moment. So I on a political level, I'm just astonished that you would effectively punch down again on a community that can't really fight for itself. It's just really, you can't, you've got no words for it.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of it comes back to the fact that there's a lot of influence from Mr. Peters and David Seymour. So I do wonder if this was a single national government, whether they would have gone this far, going back to Nick's point about they set up some of the policies. So I wonder if there's a lot of influence there from Mr. Peters and from Mr. Seymour, that why this has gone so deep.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, but at the end of the day, this is a national-led government. So Luxon is the PM, and because he is the PM and because it's national-led, it is up to National and Luxon to say no, and they are saying yes. So that tells me they are supporting, whether we want to agree with it or not. At the moment, National are going along with this, so they are supporting all of these horrors that ACT and NZ are bringing in. They're not saying no. They're not saying we disagree. They're not saying, National are not saying absolutely not, we don't support this. They're rolling over and going, oh, okay, then it'll be fine. And I think National and Luxon need to be held to account for that.
Yeah. Do you mind if I go again, Paul?
Go for it.
Yeah. So 2 points here. So do you think that the review was done by a few more national friends? And do you think that there needs to be a lot more petitions and stuff like we have seen from myself in recent times?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Blake, I don't know about the connections between the review process and the party. I just assume it went out in the normal way that these things do. Yeah, I don't know about that side of it. But in terms of the response, I mean, my suggestion is to flood the inboxes of National Party MPs and ministers every day on this issue, because there's one thing I know, having worked inside the Parliament, there's one thing that really drives ministers absolutely crazy. It's multiple emails every day on a single topic. It just drives them absolutely crazy. It drives them bonkers. So I'd encourage every single disabled person listening, every family member of a disabled person, all of us to start flooding their email box just every day.
And it's super easy to find the emails if anyone's wondering. It's all on the Parliament website.
Because they absolutely hate. Yeah.
And the other thing too, and the actual review itself, and this is that's my hidden. The actual review itself acknowledges as a risk that there is a risk of quality of care being provided may erode. But they go on to say, but that's okay, people can complain. I'm like, what the hell? It does my head in. And then it talks about other risks like, there's a risk because the expectations of the disability community are high and the relationship with the government has been eroded. So any communications need to be really clear. And I'm like, you don't understand why that trust has been eroded. That trust has been eroded because you guys decided that we weren't important. You guys decided that as family members, our well-being didn't matter anymore, that we could just do this work for free without support. And too bad if we had a mentee B on the way. No worries. That's health's problem if you have a mentee B. It's not disability support, so all good. There's such a lack of care for our well-being as individuals, as family members, as a community. I haven't encountered this ever before.
Right, I've got a question here from somebody in the chat that I don't know the answer to, but all three of you probably have a better answer than I could provide on this one. Are there any places on here or other social media channels that have more conversations like this around disability in New Zealand? I only usually get recommended overseas ones. That's from Tawhiri, who I should also thank for the super chat before. I think that's my first ever super chat, so thank you.
All right.
It's a great question, Tawhiri. I know that there are plenty of private Facebook or messenger chats groups that certainly have a very active chat culture around them. And yeah, I don't know how we'd make them available. I think people generally value their privacy quite highly, especially at the moment. There's a lot of, what I would say is there's a lot of disabled people in the community that are really quite fearful of the changes that have been taking place. So there's a lot of communication going on underground, if you like. So people are doing a lot of talking, but in protected and private spaces. Because people really don't want to put their head up above the parapet, as it were. And the people who you are seeing in putting comments out in media or online are really people that feel comfortable and confident to do so.
Yeah, or like in my case, I have a job with parents of vision impaired, and that job protects me in a way that this sort of conversation is part of my job. And so my employers support what I'm saying. They absolutely back my perspectives. And that gives me the ability to come here and say this without being afraid that my funding will get cut or my employers will get their funding cut. And that gives me a privilege. And I'm really aware that a lot of people don't have that privilege. And when you don't have that privilege, it makes it harder to be able to publicly speak out because you're more vulnerable. You're more vulnerable to abuse, but you're also more vulnerable to having your funding cut, to all of those difficulties that come. And I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunities that I have. And I do take that responsibility super seriously, because I know that not everybody gets that opportunity.
My advice would be, and thank you for the question, if you don't find any groups, make one yourself, because the more that we can have here is the better.
I think that's brilliant. I love that advice. It's brilliant advice. All right, I've got another one here for you then. Who are the main ministers to email on the disability BS? This one's from Andy Rennie.
So I would...
Go, Rebekah. Yeah.
I would always start with your local MP, because your local MP is who is elected to represent you in Parliament. And it doesn't matter what flavour, whether they're National Act, Labour, Whaikaha. They are there as your elected representative. And it always pays when you're emailing your local MP to say that you are part of their electorate, that they are your elected member. So they know you live there. They know that it's part of your role to represent them. So that is where I start. And then secondly, the minister would be Louise Upston. And that would be probably the most effective use of your time, as far as my perspective is.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'd also start emailing the Minister of Finance, just to, because ultimately all of the decisions around funding begin and end in the Treasury. So from my perspective, I'd be starting to email the Nicola Willis's office, because this is ultimately a decision around saving money. So that decision has come from Treasury at some point, and at the direction of our Finance Minister. I don't know if there's any point in emailing our Prime Minister, but you could probably add him to the list.
You could probably just flick him a message on TikTok. He spends so much time on there.
Yeah.
And I can't talk. I spend too much time on TikTok as well, but yeah.
And hey, if anyone shares this with them, they're welcome on the show any Friday night.
Yep, anytime they want. Kiwi Boob actually makes this suggestion as well about making sure you have a chat with your MPs, your local MPs, because they're paid to interact with you and to listen to your concerns. And most MPs will have some kind of public forum where you can go out and meet them, like an event or a drop-in centre or something like that. So definitely worth hunting down who your local MP is as well for that kind of thing.
And I know too, I just want to admit that sometimes it doesn't feel like you get listened to. And I want to acknowledge that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop emailing or commenting or pushing or advocating. But I do get how frustrating it is when you email your local MP and you just hear crickets back.
Yeah, I can't say I have that problem anymore.
I have a couple more questions to ask while we're still here. So you talked earlier about the benefit announcement earlier this week. How demoralising is it, because this ties in as well, that our Prime Minister was literally smiling and Louise was literally smiling this week when they both went to make their various announcements around budgets and benefits, I beg your pardon, and disability. How demoralising is that for the community? I know it's health.
Yeah, it was fucking cruel, and excuse my French, but I couldn't believe it. Like to stand there and go, oh, I don't know, and then do that little laugh, and I'm like, how can you not know? How can you not care? It is literally your job to care about the populace. And this, oh, I don't know. I just thought it was incredibly dismissive and cruel. And it took my breath away. I just was absolutely gobsmacked with such a callous response.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at that on 2 levels, and what the first level was, it was a bloody disgrace, you know, to walk in there and have a smile on your face, and just be, you know, really pleased, like you're doing something really good. It was great. It was a great thing. They were slapping each other on the back and saying, "Didn't we do a great job?" On the other level, I was just sitting there reminding myself of, you know, the fact, you know, that there are so many people out there that, like, half the people on Job Seeker have a health condition and disability. So to come out there and actually talk about how this is not going to impact disabled people is just absolute garbage. You know, this is a sanction that's specifically targeting disabled people. So it's just galling. You know, it's absolutely appalling that to come out there with a smile on your face and to not have the numbers, to not have the facts and figures at your fingertips, which you should do. I mean, you're being paid a lot of money to be doing the job, and you should have the numbers at your fingertips. Yeah, it impacts real people in an unbelievable way. It tips people's lives upside down completely. It just showed the complete lack of understanding of real people and their lives and the impact it has on real people's lives. It just showed for me that just the complete lack of empathy and understanding for real people's lives. So yeah, it was pretty tough to watch. Yeah, it just, yeah, gobsmacked.
Yeah.
Do you think they got the tone right?
Get too far into this because it'll just make.
Do you think they got the tone right for yesterday's announcement then, or do you sit there going, "We know you were fucking smiling when you did this to the people on benefits"?
I mean, the fact that these are people who are paid at least 3 times what I'm paid. So they are paid very well. They have a staff far more than what I have, probably 10 times more staff than what I have. I have 1 part-time staff who does 5 hours a week. So, you know, and they can't get the details right at their fingertips. And they're fronting up to media and they don't have this information to hand. They can't tell us this detail. So either they haven't done the work, they haven't actually properly sorted it out, or they don't care. Those are the 2 options as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I guess what I was really disappointed by, especially with the Minister Upston's media round yesterday, was that, you know, she literally said a couple of times when asked, "Oh, don't worry, I'll help to get the disabled people into work," when most of them can't work.
Yeah. And it was really galling for me because she had been in a meeting that I was chairing and she had, you know, said all these things and we're going, "Oh, okay, this sounds really great." And then literally not even a week later, she's fronting up and going, "No, we're stripping Whaikaha, we're putting it all into MSD, we haven't consulted with any disabled people, we haven't consulted with any family, we might talk to you soon if you're lucky, but and actually it'll be fine, don't worry." And I'm like, you have no idea what is happening in our lives. Like you say, nothing has changed, but you have just increased exponentially the uncertainty. And we've already had uncertainty with March. We're already worried about what's happening. And now you're shifting our funding into MSD, who is known to be cruel to disabled people and families, who is knowing to deny us our entitlements, who is knowing to be absolutely appalling in the name of saving money, even though we all know it'll cost 10 times more in 3 years. How can you be paid this much money and be this ignorant?
Anything else from you, Paul?
Well, I've got another question here from the chat. How can we get the centre-right leaning population to realise all this?
I mean, I think this is like, I think people, I mean, most people I talk to are good, decent humans, you know. Most people will really experience disability at some point in their life, whether through aging or through connection to a family member. So this is not an issue that you can park in a box and say, this doesn't relate to me. I feel like there is some form of othering of this issue, like it doesn't relate to me. It's not something that I'll ever have to deal with. But I feel like this is an issue in terms of disability related matters that will impact on everyone in their lifetime in some way or another, either through their personal experience, through aging, or through a connection to someone they know or a family member. So I feel like everyone's got skin in this game, regardless. And I feel like we just need to do a better job at communicating that fact and just getting people involved in these issues. And because there is a bit of othering of this, and we do tend to be a little bit insular within our community for just survival reasons. You know, I mean, there's so much going on that we just have to protect ourselves from events like March and events like this week. But I feel like when we do go out to the general public, like I was just thinking about EGL. I was thinking about if we took EGL out to the general community and we asked people, would there be support for the payment of supports for disabled people? I think you would get most people saying, yep, we're in for that. So I feel like government is off track on this one when they're starting to cut back on the payment of supports for disabled people. I feel like there are other things that they really should be focusing on first. I think this is an issue that will impact a lot of people throughout their lifetime. And I think in terms of public support, that they're really offbeat on this one. Coming after disabled people is not a good look. You know, it doesn't poll well. You know, if we were to poll this one, it wouldn't come back well. And I just think we need to really start reaching out to our communities and just spreading out that community of interest a little wider, and just seeing what comes back.
What I would add is I really like what I don't know if either of you listened to it, what Patrick Gower said on Radio New Zealand yesterday, I believe it was, that he believes we need a disability party, and that's something I'd be keen to see happen. I don't know whether it will happen in my lifetime, but that'd be something I'd like to see.
Take your own advice, Blake, and start one.
I think it's worth mentioning that the social investment model is a centre-right model. And it was National who actually implemented a social investment model, and it was National who implemented an Enabling Good Lives model. And so there is already a very strong history with the centre-right of intervening early and preventative intervention in order to save money down the track, that social investment model. And it is quite devastating to see this current government absolutely trash what has been a really good track record with disability.
Yeah. Any final comments from you, Paul?
I'm just enjoying the conversation and reading the comments that are coming through. There's some fantastic stuff that's coming through here. And it seems pretty clear that people just aren't happy with this decision. Like it feels reactionary and it feels pointed. And that's not a good thing. And we can't even poll to see how people think about these things because David Farrar stopped being a member of the polling organization because apparently he was doing dodgy things they didn't like. So I guess we'll never know. I know. I've been keeping track actually of the polls throughout the year. And one of the things I found really interesting was his was the only poll that consistently put ACT on 9%. Everybody else had it around 7%. Like, that certainly doesn't sound dodgy in any way or form. Yeah. My last question is actually a really simple one. What do you hope to see happen next? Well, I think it's a simple one. It's probably got a complicated answer.
Geez, Paul, that's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the community is tired at the moment. We've just been whacked around for, basically since this government came into office. They've been giving us a good whack around, and it's just really it's really tough. I think. I mean, we haven't even talked about the Royal Commission. Like, I mean, that's an episode all to itself. So I think I'm going to be really interested to see how this government delivers the apology, because we haven't even mentioned that MSD is a named organisation in the Royal Commission. So we're going to get to November, and the government is going to have to deliver an apology to disabled people. So I feel like if we can get to November and have a moment of healing around that, I think that will be really useful for us. But I feel like there has been a significant erosion of trust with disabled people with this particular government. And I feel like it's really incumbent on this government to really work very, very hard now to build that trust up, because the trust was very low anyway, and they've just taken some significant steps to continue to erode that trust, and I feel like they've got to take the steps now to rebuild that trust. Otherwise, I'm really, really worried about what will happen, just in terms of disabled people's trust in government as a big G. Because if we have a loss of trust in government, then I'm, because our reliance on government services, health, housing, education, MS, payments is quite significant. It's more so than almost any other community. So we need to trust government, and at the moment it's very, very low, and I feel like there needs to be a rebuilding of that trust, and hopefully the Royal Commission apology will start to rebuild that. But it's really on this government now to really step up and start with trust building exercises, because if they don't, then we could just completely lose trust.
My closing comment would be that my worry is that if the government does switch back in 2026, Labour are going to have a hell of a lot of work to clean up. And my worry is, can they clean it up? Like, in 3 years? I don't know. I'm dubious. It's possible. I don't know.
I would love to see National step up and provide some proper leadership, say to ACT, actually, you know what? Your positions and your policies are detrimental to New Zealand people. They are causing immense harm, and we are not going to allow you to do that anymore. And there are lots of ways that National could do that. And there are lots of ways that National could partner with other parties in order to prevent the incredible harm that ACT is doing. As long as National goes along with what ACT is saying and doing and wanting, National will be tarred with the same brush. And if they want to avoid that, they need to do something about it now.
Yeah. My worry with that is, though, that if they do that, then the ACT Party will say, okay, we don't want any more part of this. Bye, see you later, and we have an early election.
Woohoo! Early election! Bring on the left-wing government, baby!
kind of electioned out.
Yeah.
It went from local body to central government, and then there's been like a whole bunch of by-elections, and then the Tauranga election, and I'm kind of liking like a month without elections. It's quiet.
Oh wow! Oh wow! We've got all that fun coming up with the by-election, with the local body elections.
One can but dream.
Actually, that's probably a really interesting perspective as well, because obviously when you're dealing with councils and local body facilities for people with disabilities, how much sort of pressure do you think people should be putting onto councils as well to make sure that they're working with central government here to make sure that, you know, the needs are being met for the community in very different ways from different providers?
Well, you just opened up a big Pandora's box there, Paul,
Okay.
One of my, I could seriously go on about this for a day or two. In one of my former lives, I chaired an advisory group to a local, to a council. We need serious fundamental reform of how we do disability in local government, because at the moment we're just not doing it properly. Our councils don't recognise any form of legislation that relates to disability at all. That they're completely governed by the Local Government Act, which is what they're meant to do, but there's nothing in the Local Government Act that relates to disability. So we're completely reliant upon the kindness of elected members, and sometimes they're not very kind. Just put it politely. So we need fundamental reform at the structural level, at the legislative level, so that we can bring in the UN CRPD, which is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, down to local government. I mean, like I said, I could talk about this for a very, very long time, because it's. I mean, the really serious point is that local governments impact disabled people actually far more often than central government, because we're talking about footpaths, we're talking about public transport, we're talking about toilets, we're talking about, you know, the really important stuff, and councils just are not taking it seriously, because they don't have the right levers, and so again, another episode. Love to talk about it, but my goodness, and they don't have enough money, so that's a whole nother thing as well. But
I mean, look, I'm in Hamilton as my local council, and we have Councillor Bidder who used some incredibly offensive that Andrew Bidder.
I can't even think of a nice way to describe him. He's a fucking moron. He's a nasty piece of work.
Thing, it gets worse. So we've put in, several people put in complaints, including myself. There was a formal investigation. They decided, yes, he breached the code. There is literally nothing they can do about it. They cannot fire him. They cannot get rid of him. They cannot penalise him. There is nothing that can be done. I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, that's just ridiculous.
It's a major flaw in the legislation, and the review for the future in local government that was done last year actually had in there a suggestion for levers that they could pull, like an independent commission that can investigate any council that has those kind of issues pop up. And Simeon Brown was just like, nah, Labor did it, so it's bad.
Hashtag Labor bad.
Right.
Yeah. I know, but hopefully David's not there after Andrew's not there after the next election in Hamilton, because
who knows? We've got some
dangerous one.
Yeah, he's very unpleasant.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I think I'm out of questions. I haven't had any major new questions pop up in the chat. So anything left from you, Blake?
If you want a part 2, let us know.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Right. I'm going to introduce the news. Nick and Bex, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It has been really appreciated and a fantastic conversation. For people that are watching, don't forget we've still got an interview coming up with Shanan, Halbert and Carmel Sepuloni as well, where we do actually talk a little bit about local council reform, particularly around the Māori wards and what Labour is kind of edging to do with changes, because they're really cognizant of the fact that the councils are being forced to have these referendum on Māori wards, and it's going to cost them money. And if Labour comes in and suddenly goes, well, no, we'll just change everything, it's going to, what a waste of money. So yeah, so that conversation will be coming up shortly. Rebekah and Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot. I
My
really
pleasure.
enjoyed that. Thank you.
All right.
So that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Geniuses. Like I said, geniuses.
Unfortunately, I couldn't see the chat during that thing, but I assume it was very popping.
It was, yeah, people are absolutely brilliant with what they're saying. Right, I should do another introduction for the news and see how this goes and make sure I don't screw this up too much. So, and I'm calling this news segment "What the fuck happened this week?" because that's just how news feel at the moment.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to start with this because it's great fun. Great picture here. Right, on Saturday, Simeon Brown, seen here wondering why there's a bed leg being brought into the room, tried to blame the Labour Party for issues leading to massive wholesale power prices because of their ban in 2018 on oil and gas exploration, a process which nets results in just 10 short years. And this is a true fact, 2018 was less than 10 years ago, and ignores the fact that no new oil or gas reserves were found under John Key's leadership either. On Sunday, let's see if things should move when I press the button. I knew technology was going to do me wrong. On Sunday, Tama Portaka, seen here finding out fellow Hamilton MP Ryan Hamilton was once a member of Destiny Church, announced that the government had reduced the number of people in emergency housing by 30%. Of those, he said 50% had gone into private housing, 30% into some form of social housing that the Labour Party built, which the National Party has slowed down to a snail's pace, but he still took credit for, and he couldn't account for at least 20%. And it's probably a total coincidence that homeless groups say that the problem's the worst it's ever been, and MSD have been ordered to be harsher on people needing help with their rents, and tent cities keep popping up all over the place. Total coincidence.
Yeah.
On Monday, the Police Association called for the Prime Minister to sack Minister Nicole McKee. She was basically doing very secretive things and trying to work out what it was that she wanted to change in the gun law reform. She's actually pictured here showing the Police Association where they can stick their opinions. She told the Police Association that they were being paranoid, and this is going to be a new law that keeps them far too busy to deal with things like investigating ACT Party presidents. All right. The closing ceremony of the Olympics had another world map which didn't have New Zealand on it, because there's nothing more French than ignoring people who refuse to speak anything other than English. The Games are being touted as our most successful ever after record investment in high-performance sport by the previous government saw success across multiple sports. And not a single one of our athletes made world news for bad breakdancing or having multiple poles in the pole vault. It's been a big week for Social Development Minister and beauty pageant lover Louise Upston, seen here grinning like she's won the lottery after announcing a new range of punitive sanction increases on beneficiaries, which have been called reductive, dehumanizing, cruel, and ineffective by experts. In response, Upston said, "Thanks, we tried." Upston also faced the media when announcing changes to Whaikaha, changes which experts have called reductive, dehumanizing, cruel, and ineffective, to which he responded, "Oh, you guys, I didn't think you'd notice." On Wednesday, the Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr, seen here breaking out his Paso Doble moves, announced the reduction of the OCR for the first time in years. When asked if government spending was the reason for this, he said government spending, including tax cuts, are expansionary, but pointed out that the rest of the world had governments that have actually got their shit together, and that offset the inflation rates. When asked for a comment, Prime Minister Chris Luxon said, "I made this. I'm a clever boy." Clever was spelt with a K.
Ooh.
On Thursday, Te Whatu Ora Commissioner Dr Lester Levy, seen here showing the health sector how many staff will be left in hospitals at the end of his tenure, announced massive reductions in the department's commissions office. This is the organisation that works with health providers around the country in areas like rest homes, care centres and medical offices. The department is now running with less than half the staff it began with. While he made assurances this backroom cull will have no impact on frontline staff, the people who organise things like patient meetings, order equipment and supplies, plan work schedules and sort payroll were all too busy supporting doctors and nurses to believe him. I got to make this easier next time. Police Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here applying to be the next Gerber baby, once again made claims he can't back up. Sorry, I should probably clarify because he does this so often. With this government, you might need specifics to work out which issue it's happening to this time. He specifically made this claim about the New Zealand Defence Force again being frontline contact points for their children's boot camps, but couldn't provide any evidence of this after NZDF once again said that they were not. Mitchell actually promised before the election that if crimes rose during his first year as police minister, he'd quit. And data released this week shows a 17% increase in retail crime, along with a rise in violent crime. And I'm sure he will absolutely follow through on his promise, said no one ever. And finally, news that came out today, it was announced that the government has appointed Dr. Melissa Derby as the new Race Relations Commissioner. As a founding member of the Free Speech Union and someone who supported raising funds to fight the legal challenge to allow alt-right white supremacists Lauren Southern and Stephen Molyneux to use Auckland Council venues, there's bound to be no issues at all with her in the role. Yeah, great fun with these people. The government at the same time also announced the new Chief Human Rights Commissioner, a man by the name of Dr. Stephen Rainbow, who is a long-time advocate for gay rights. And I'm sure that he has no other issues at all that would ever crop up and be problematic with him being in charge of human rights. And that's it for the news. Super easy.
As you can see, literally laughable.
I hope so. I'm going to have to go back and look through the comments on that one shortly. But yeah, it was a busy week.
And I apologize to everyone for laughing, but that was literally laughable.
I want people to laugh at these things because they can. Right. I think it's probably a good idea for us to jump into our interview with Carmel and Shanan. So I will get that up and running and we'll be back in about half an hour. As I said, this was pre-recorded. So it is before everything that happened this week. It's such a whip lot. Like it's everything moving so fast. But yeah, let's jump in and check out this interview. Joining me now from Tamaki Makaurau's Labour headquarters. Is this the Britomart headquarters that you're in at the moment?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I've got Shanan Halbert, List MP, who's based up in Northcote, who I really wish was my local MP, and Carmel Sepuloni, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, based from Kelston. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for being here.
Carmel, what are your plans for should you get in 2026 or before, depending on when the election happens, to improve what the government have done so far with the Ministry of Social Development?
Oh, thanks so much for that question, Blake. Well, we had a whole overall plan based around the Welfare Expert Advisory Group's report. I think everyone's aware that we had implemented some of the recommendations, done some of the work, and each year I was reporting to Cabinet on what would come next. Now, we haven't had the opportunity to do any of that stuff since 2003 because obviously we weren't re-elected into government. But I think that plan still stands. That report is an amazing report that provides a roadmap for us moving forward, and we should stick to that roadmap. I am keen to make sure, though, that I'm hearing from the sector with regards to whether or not that's still the right plan, which parts of it they think need to be prioritised, and also what they think a new government should prioritise in terms of reinstating stuff that may have been cancelled by this national government or changing things that this national government is doing. So there will be a lot to do when we get re-elected. We're planning for that to be in 2 years, by the way. So we are doing the mahi now to make sure that we're ready to run.
How much work is going on in the background actually for the election at the moment?
Well, we've got our policy committees from the party as well as us with our portfolios. Chris, as leader, asked all of us to provide portfolio plans for how we're going to engage with stakeholders over the next 2 years, how we're going to manage and prioritise policy considerations, and opportunities in the portfolio moving forward, as well as challenges in the portfolio. So we've all got quite a lot of work in front of us, and we've got our leader watching over that work to ensure that each and every one of us is fulfilling our responsibilities with our portfolios.
Part of my work in the Auckland Issues portfolio has been getting out across Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, talking to our key stakeholders, both friends of Labour, and also speaking to those who aren't friends of Labour. But people do know the reality of politics and the possibility of us picking up government in 2026. So they understand the importance of that dialogue, that kōrero happening, to ensure that that any future government's able to support the city to do well, whether that be through productivity, whether it's getting on top of some of the poverty that we see in the city. But, I always talk about my story of why I came to Auckland, and that was for opportunity and prosperity. And that's the story of many Aucklanders.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to make that connection with people, but under that with stakeholders, it's a real rebuild for us in Auckland. We know we didn't do well here. We want to do better, and we know the importance of Auckland, not only to people that live in the city, but to the whole of Aotearoa New Zealand. This country will benefit from Auckland doing well. So, we're out doing the hard yards in the mahi at the moment in that rebuild, working with our MPs that are across the city. And we're accelerating our listening campaign, getting out amongst business and community. And I think since we chatted last time, we've had Chris Hipkins here, our caucus, do our retreat out, meeting with stakeholder groups. So there's not a shortage of effort and mahi going on.
Yeah.
But as you would appreciate, and our people out there, is that it's a build project where we can regain that trust and confidence, where people may not have felt that from our government. They wanted change, but sadly, so many people are coming back to us at the moment and say we voted for change, but this isn't quite what we saw. And the reality for Aucklanders is that it's becoming more expensive to live here under this government.
You talk about how you were on the channel last time, and you were talking about starting to see a bit of voter regret. So you were just talking there about it. How much have you seen an increase since the last time you're on the channel?
Quite a lot. Not everyone's at the regret stage, but certainly people are thinking, what the heck is this government focused on? This isn't quite the things that we thought they were going to focus on. When we lean back into sort of the anti-Māori sentiment that this government has rolled out, that wasn't everyone's intention. That's not what people voted for. They didn't want race relations to become a difficult part in this country. The thing they did vote for was cost of living relief. And the national government has talked quite often about the repeal of the regional fuel tax. That saved Aucklanders about $2 a week. But in reality, they've added on additional costs and registration fees, fuel excise tax, public transport funding has been taken away, and people are feeling the effects on that.
Yeah.
I spoke in the House this week that for the average whānau living in Auckland, it's about $80 more than what it was under our government. So, I'm not convinced that Simeon Brown is the Minister of Auckland, or this government, in fact, has any plans around cost of living relief. And my other issues for the Auckland portfolio is around crime and congestion, and I'm not seeing any action on that as well.
Yeah. I have to say, there's been a lot of things happening lately where we're all going, what's going on? Last week we had Pingate. We're adamant they must be able to wear their lapel pins in their house, and were putting their foot down and standing up for themselves over it. We had a complaint from the ACT Party alleging racism in our select committee just because the opposition members didn't feel that an ACT Party member was experienced enough or the right person to chair a subcommittee with OT submissions coming through, and a range of other things. And sometimes we're in Wellington going, this is not what I'm here for, but you're forced into a position where you have to comment, provide context on these particular issues, and it all feels very trivial when you put it into the context of what really does matter for New Zealanders at the moment. And it's some of the stuff that Shanan's talking about. It's certainly not about a person's right to wear a pin with their political logo on it in a space. So yeah, it's been a bit strange down there, I have to say.
But we had the report come out on children in care.
State care, yes.
And at the same time, this government slams through boot camps as a priority. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
And does the Māori ward
within 24 hours.
Yes.
No council wants to.
24 hours within that report, and they're like, yeah, boot camps. Which actually brings me to my next question, because that's a really good example of the government using spin to put out disinformation. All the research on boot camps, for example, show the same thing. This is a cycle of abuse that's going to keep going while they keep doing this kind of action. How do you guys look at that disinformation and combat it?
Look, I mean, all you can do is try and put all of the facts on the table and then constantly reiterate those. But the government will do what the government will do, and the government will say what the government will say. One of the really good examples of where it just continues to get spun is where the government made the conscious decision to change the way in which benefits would increase each year, attaching it back to CPI rather than wage growth, knowing full well that will save them money that they can then use for their tax cuts, but that in the short, mid, long term, beneficiaries will end up with less money. And yet they refuse to state clearly that it is a cut to beneficiaries, even though it is, And so there are times where you feel like, as a politician, you're getting gaslit, and certainly that the country is getting gaslit by this government. But we just have to persevere and just keep saying on record what is right and true, and hope that resonates and gets through to New Zealanders. Another classic example this week: employment rates came out, and of course that's got worse. Government refused to take any ownership over the fact that they may have had a role in this, despite the fact that one of their first actions was to make cuts so that leading to inevitably thousands fewer New Zealanders employed in the public sector. Well, all of that has flow-on impacts. And so, here we are now with worse employment than what they had when they took office, more New Zealanders out of work, 21,000 more New Zealanders on benefit, and yet they continue to say that they have no role in this, they're not responsible for it, it's about a situation they inherited. Well, actually, they do have responsibility. They are in charge now, and they have been for the last 9 months.
Looking at those numbers, actually, for MSD, there's some really disproportionate outcomes there, looking at Māori and Pacifica communities, in particular when it comes to the rate of sanctions that this government's reintroduced. Is there something that people can sort of look at and go, look, this is what's causing that disproportionate sanction numbers? Or is it, because the government is feeding this through having deliberately anti-Māori policies, that sort of comes through to MSD and their decision-making process? Or is there other factors that might be leading to that?
Well, Māori are disproportionately represented on the benefit. I think it is important to note that. And of course, given the range of social challenges that many of the whānau on benefit face, are particularly vulnerable. And so, I'm not surprised that there's a disproportionate impact for Māori in particular, and for Pacific when it comes to sanctioning. But we have to be clear, the government, because the economy's not doing well, because people are losing jobs at a higher rate, there are going to be more people coming on to benefit. And so what we're inevitably seeing is a government trying to, I believe, make it more difficult for people to come on to benefit, and as well utilising tools like sanctions as a way of making it difficult for people to stay on benefit. Because really those are their only two strategies for trying to reduce the numbers. There aren't the jobs out there. for people to go into. And so these are the only two strategies that I think they are trying to utilise in any way, and they're not good. That's not a good way to treat people who are in the welfare system.
This sort of approach also continues to the way that this government thinks about young people. And I like to think that when we're in government,
about young people?
Do they?
Well, when we were in government, I like to think that we really thought about hope and aspiration and opportunity, and carving pathways for people to enable them in their life, whether that be through education and employment. But what we're seeing in this government is at one extreme, the boot camps mentality, where every approach is punitive. And then we go through to their focus in education, which is micromanaging. It's really old school, back to the 90s. It's like a bunch of, like, our parents have told us that we have to go back and do 1 hour of reading, writing, and arithmetic in order for us to be good. And any educator knows that we need to empower our young people, give them self-belief, and change the ways that people teach and learn in modern settings. And when we take a punitive approach, young people, particularly in this generation, just don't respond to that to do better than where they're currently at. So, and then again, the other extreme is over to charter schools, where
you won't have to do any of that.
Where the government says, do whatever the heck you want. Here's the measurements. And David Seymour saying that that's tino rangatiratanga in action. And I've challenged him in the House to say, well, firstly, tino rangatiratanga didn't come from a model over in the States.
So another role that you hold, Shannon, is the rainbow community. So how disheartening is it to have seen for you so much attack and so much issue taken with the rainbow community within this term already?
When I reflect on this, I just think, how the heck did we get here? Where we've come as a country from being so progressive for our rainbow communities. And I was in our rainbow room at Parliament yesterday, showing people around, and looked at the legislation of marriage equality and the first bill that I was a part of with banning conversion practices. That is true progress. And to come to a place where it seems that everyone wants to go backwards on recognising people for who they are, who they love, addressing the mental health concerns of young people from our rainbow community. Suddenly this government stepped away from that. And it's been really sad for me, and a punch in the guts, really. I think is how the rainbow community feels when you have the Deputy Prime Minister openly commenting on somebody that they believe is a trans person in the Olympic Games, boxing, and then you find out a few hours later that factually that isn't true, and the Deputy Prime Minister is unwilling to withdraw those sorts of comments. How was this of interest to people in such high leadership roles within the New Zealand government? How do people feel included in this country if our most established leaders aren't seen to be advocating for them? So that's the sad part for me. When you're in government, you have to govern for everyone. You can't just govern for your particular groups. And that's an important lesson that I think we've taken on board after a loss. It's something that we have to take forward. But, we've got to build a country based on progress, and where we accept one another for who they are, and we celebrate that.
How does that comment from Winston Peters make us look, knowing that he's our foreign minister? From an international perspective, has there been any issues that you guys have come across from how it represents us as a country?
Well, the thing that the Deputy Prime Minister did was comment on X, formerly known as Twitter, too quickly without actually finding the facts. Even if that was his position, I personally try not to react or respond to that sort of commentary, because I believe that it gives him a platform to spread hate towards the trans and rainbow community. my focus really has been on raising the safety issues of our rainbow community with the Minister of Police. Over a month ago, I wrote to him with concerns about rainbow crossings, Destiny Church protests outside of schools. You know, that is fear and intimidation of young people, that is damage to property. And I called on Mark Mitchell to come up with a community safety plan for the rainbow community because these issues need to be taken seriously. To me, those are the things that count. We've got to come back and go, how do we ensure that people feel safe in our community, particularly our young people and their whānau? But sadly, a month on, I haven't heard back from Minister Mitchell, so I suspect it's not a priority for him.
So you've written to Mr. Mitchell and asked him to look into these issues. How concerned are you for the safety, reiterating on your comment about the rainbow community's safety?
I've been really concerned about their safety. With the hate that's spread, it really impacts on the mental health of our children and young people. And, you know, we've got evidence and research time and time again that rainbow young people are overrepresented in poor mental health statistics and suicide. And that comes directly from not feeling included and accepted in their whānau community and in society. For the minister not to respond in the first instance, I can deal with the politics of that. But I hope in the background that he has taken this seriously and he's working with New Zealand Police to improve their practices. I think New Zealand Police are doing what they can to deal with these issues, but it's not fair that a religious group like Destiny Church stands outside a school. If it was any other protest group, parents would not accept that, and the police, I believe, would treat it quite differently. So, you know, to have that fear and intimidation, I don't think is fair. I think it's very unsafe, and I think we need to take action on that and start treating the rainbow community as a priority in any sense, just like they would others.
Yeah.
What would you like to see the government do about Mr. Tamaki and the Destiny Church?
People are free to have their views. The moment that you intimidate or children and their whānau feel unsafe, embarrassed, because in some cases young people are going to these places, they haven't come out to their whānau, and you've got these people standing outside making them feel embarrassed, uncomfortable about who they are.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, that's the behaviours, the negative behaviours that I want to end. That's what needs to be taken care of. What Brian Tamaki preaches within his four walls of his church, I don't really care. But what I do care about is our young rainbow rangatahi, that they're able to live in the community and be proud of who they are.
Yeah.
I'll say I'm going to change the topics a little bit, but it does kind of tie into making sure people in the community feel like they belong. I'd like to know about Māori wards. Obviously a big topic at the moment with everything that's going back and forth. Thousands of submissions for the select committee, and the vast majority of them were against the changes that the government's made. We saw not that long ago, Kaipara rushed through to get rid of the Māori ward. Do Labour have plans for what they would do when they get back in power? Are we looking at a return to what we've got, or some other sort of path forward to make sure that that representation is there?
Yeah, let's be very clear that the repeal of Māori wards is discriminatory policy. It's designed to obstruct Māori from having representation at our council tables. That's not afforded to the likes of rural wards or other population groups. It's just there for Māori, and on that basis, that's what makes it discriminatory. What's important for us is that over the next couple of years, that we work with councils directly to identify how they best achieve Māori wards, if that's what they want, or representative models. I take one example, and personally, I'm a big fan of Māori wards. Every council that established Māori wards has seen the benefits. The Kaipara Council is sort of an outlier in that sense. But, we've seen in the media, I guess, some of the discrimination that's come over that period since that Māori ward was established. But a big shout out to Palmerston North, who have supported the Māori ward to continue. When we come back into government, we will certainly be working with councils to establish Māori wards where they want them, or put good representative practices in place. I mean, the majority of councils that established Māori wards wanted to keep them. They thought that the government repealing this at their cost is an absolute overreach. This was a government that campaigned on local democracy, and here they are sort of taking control of something that isn't a priority for councils. The part that I said directly to the Minister in the House was about when it comes to councils who are low on funding at the moment, they've had to increase rates, and there's a cost afforded to them of, let's say, $50,000 in order to ask their community if they want to keep a Māori ward. They are just going to say no, many of them, because they simply can't afford to do that. That's not fair, and that's another layer of discrimination. So Labour certainly supports Māori wards, and will be working with councils to establish the best representative model for them moving forward.
Did either of you read the Future for Government, Local Government report?
You have to rejig.
I realise this is probably more Kieran's field of expertise, with it being his portfolio, and the timing of it was terrible because it came out sort of just before the election. But it pointed out one of the really big issues is voter turnout, like just getting people out to vote in local body elections. Any ideas on how people could fix that? How you get the voter turnout up on something like that?
I think we've all been saying for a long time that postal voting is hardly a modern way of engaging with the democratic system, but we don't have a credible and reliable alternative at the moment. So we're not in a place, I guess, where we're able to move beyond the postal ballot voting. I do think that this should be a priority, really, because I said to a number of people, even our letterboxes are becoming strange items at the front of our house. How often are they checked? What do we receive through the mail these days? And so I do think that this should be a priority over the next few years with respect to how people can engage and cast their vote, because postal voting is so last century, maybe even the century before in some ways, but yeah.
And we did do some of this work when we were in government, and one of those recommendations was to take forward the Make It 16 campaign, which
we're supportive of,
which enabled us to dip our toe in as a country in local government and see if this works, whether it improves civics education in one sense and participation in the other. Again, this government isn't really prioritising the things that are important.
So just to wind down, so just to clarify, the Labour Party supports both 16 for general and local elections.
I think we were looking at doing a phased option on that. I mean, I personally am, Blake. I personally am. I think probably Shanan is too. Can't recall exactly what our policy was, but I think the starting point might have been with local body.
Was that under 16?
Yeah.
Yeah.
16,
so
16.
Starting point. First step was to take it through local government.
And just to finish off, how disappointed as the Parliament was it seeing only a 30%-ish turnout in Tauranga recently?
Well, look at the result. It wasn't a result that was unexpected for a city like Tauranga. I think there's probably some missed opportunities in that. We're lucky enough to get one Māori up, I think, in quite a significant part of New Zealand.
And Blake, to be honest, because the turnout is just so low all of the time, particularly in seats where you have large numbers of Māori, Pacific and young people, then it doesn't come as too much of a surprise that there'd only be 30% turnout for the Tauranga election. However, we want to be better than that, and so that is why some thinking needs to go into this moving forward.
Politics is hard at the moment. you know, and the part that I'm really worried about is how the public perceives politicians. And when I say that this government isn't focused on the things that the public necessarily wanted or voted for, that feeds into people's perceptions that politicians aren't always there for their interests, that they lack their confidence in their local politicians. And we need to really improve that, because so many of us work really hard in our local communities, but are let down by some of the pettiness that I think we're seeing in New Zealand's political landscape.
We all get tainted with that, to be honest. I think it doesn't matter which political party is responsible for the trivial behaviour or the actions that bring into question integrity. It taints all of us, and so we're very mindful of that, and wanting to be perceived as trusted public figures that New Zealanders can rely on. But it is difficult.
That are focused on housing, health, and education.
Things that matter.
Sorry. Finally, in your position as Auckland Issues spokesperson, Shanan, how are you feeling about the new water done well, especially in your area? Because that's where it was lifted off from.
Yeah, so the National Party policy is still more expensive than what we proposed for Auckland. My greater concern is that it cuts off places like Taitokerau in Northland. I can't see how three councils across Northland are ever going to be able to finance water infrastructure, and suddenly we start to create a 2-3 state society when it comes to the basics of clean water in our households. Northland's struggling already. There's other parts down Tairāwhiti, down the east coast, and in the South Island, where I think they haven't thought it through very well. It pushes the responsibility away from central government onto local government, and that will see an increase in rates.
Ultimately, right now, in particular, with the cost of living being on the minds of New Zealanders more than anything else, and just struggling to pay those basic everyday costs, this is a really bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to wrap everything up. Shanan, Carmel, thank you so much for joining us today. Very much appreciated. Keep up the great work. It's fantastic having you here.
Tēnā kōrua.
Right, that was Shanan and Carmel from the Labour Party. And I'm drinking ginger beer and it's ripping my throat to shreds. It's such a smart move to do on a live stream. I think that's us pretty much done for the night. I want to thank everybody who's been joining us in the chat, who came along and asked questions before. I personally want to thank as well everybody who's done super chats or signed up as a member on the YouTube page, because that's new and exciting and something I haven't done before. For people who are members on there, you get to see stuff when I upload it, not when I release it. So you can already see tomorrow's video where I swear an awful lot about David Seymour. It's great fun. I even got a clip in from Lord of the Rings for tomorrow's video. So I'm very proud of that. So it's one of those things. Anything you want to finish off with, Blake?
We might do some exclusive members content too. So
Yep, that's the plan. So yeah, thank you to everybody who came along. Any final thoughts before we wrap everything up?
Yeah. So next week we've got the pre-recorded interview with Jan Janetti, and Clint Smith will be live next week.
Should point out as well for our pre-record with Jan, we're going to make sure it's a little bit closer to when we go to air than the last one, because whiplash. Just whiplash.
Yeah.
And don't forget, if people have missed this, because I just saw this comment pop up from Chris in the chat, it's fine. It'll be available on YouTube here for Paul, the other one, the BFG podcast, and available on Facebook, and it will be available on Apple and Spotify podcasts in the morning for everyone to be able to have a look at and listen to. So lots to do. Until next time, thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.